It's appropriate because our world likes a good fight. Fight movies, fight politics, fights. I think we've forgotten what it means to bury the hatchet. The way I see the newspapers going, burying the hatchet means burying it in your enemy. I'm Don Brandon. This is another video for Carter Christian Church, a place that sometimes there can be a fight there too. You'd be surprised. There's not supposed to be fights in the church. The church is part of this world. We're not above the troubles and the struggles. But we fight with weapons that are different than the world's. That's our lesson today. I want you to hear what the Apostle Paul has to say. Come join me.
No matter what sports you follow, or even if you don't follow any sports at all, you know what it's like to be close, but no good. Okay. Oh, can you believe that? Close, but no good. Football. It's up. It's on the way. Doink, 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 doink. Close, but no good. Baseball is filled with close. There's a hit. He's rounding first base. All right, that wasn't even close, and it was no good. And they're laughing at each other right now. How embarrassing. The next clip happened last Monday. I want you to watch that kid in the center. He came so close to catching the home run, and he was so disappointed. In this series we're looking at about the Corinthian Christians that have gone wild all of a sudden, the Apostle Paul is under attack. And people are saying about him, he's not close and he's no good. He's not close because he's way over there in Ephesus. And we're over here in Corinth. And he's no good because, well, we'll get to that. But first, let's review. As you know, in your Bibles, we have two letters to the Corinthians written by the Apostle Paul. 1st and 2nd Corinthians. But by Paul's own writings, he tells us that he wrote at least 4 letters to the Corinthians. The previous letter, and then he wrote a dirty laundry teaching letter, and then he wrote a severe letter, and then he wrote the letter of reconciliation. And if you go to page 17 on your handouts, that's where the Corinthian timeline is that kind of sorts this all together and puts it in the right order. But the premise of this study is that we believe you can find all or parts of these 4 letters embedded in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Now, not everybody believes that. Not all scholars ascribe to this. But it is not hard in the imagination to think about how the letters might have gotten jumbled a little together, over the course of several decades while they were being passed along to the various churches. Though there might be some disagreement about that, there is absolutely no disagreement that God used this imperfect system of people and history to get his truth across 2,000 years to us this very day. That miracle is one reason why we believe the Bible is God-breathed. Now, we have already discussed the fact that there was a first letter, the previous letter. And we think we know where we can see that embedded in 2 Corinthians. That was session 1. Then last week, we went through all 16 chapters of the second letter, the teaching letter. We call it the dirty laundry letter. That's the letter we know as 1 Corinthians. But after that came a third letter. We call it the severe letter. And like the previous letter, it's lost. And like the previous letter, we think there might be some fragments of it embedded in 2 Corinthians. But unlike the previous letter, which only has a few verses, we think we can find as many as 4 chapters of this severe letter. And one of the hints as to where it is located in 2 Corinthians is found in the rather severe change of tone that takes place. If you look at the end of 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and then go to chapter 10, something rather amazing happens. I'm going to try to demonstrate it to you here. This is the end of chapter 9. This service, collecting an offering for persecuted Christians, that you are performing is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but it's also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. Because of the service by which you have proved yourselves, others will praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel of Christ and for your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you because of the surpassing grace God has given you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. And then you turn the page to chapter 10. By the humility and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you. I, Paul, who am timid when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I'm away. I beg you that when I come, I may not have to be as bold as I expect I'm going to have to be to some people who think that I live by the standards of this world. For though we live by the world, we do not fight war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. And on the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought it makes to make it obedient to Christ, and we will be ready to punish every act of obedience once your obedience is complete. Wow! What a change of tone! Paul, what happened here? From one chapter to the next. Is it possible that at the beginning of chapter 10, we're starting a new letter? That maybe this is the remnants of that severe letter that Paul wrote? Even if this is not true, the fact of the matter is, Paul wrote such a letter. It happened after last week's letter, the dirty laundry letter. And I told you at the end of that message, things got worse. You would have thought things would have gotten better, but those Corinthian Christians got wilder and wilder. And so Paul has to make an emergency trip from Ephesus back to Corinth. He writes about it in several places. He calls it the painful visit. So I made up my mind that I would not make another painful visit to you. In another place, he says, now I'm ready to visit you the third time. So there must have been a second visit. And then, most telling of all, this will be my third visit to you. I already gave you a warning when I was with you the second time. Warnings. Uncomfortable. Painful visit by Paul's own words. And you have to ask yourself, what happened? Why is this visit so painful? I mean, Paul loves these Corinthians. He started the church there. He has been with them for 18 months, more than he has been with other churches. And so he goes back in this second visit, and things do not go well. Paul says it's a painful visit. Why? Several reasons come to mind. The first might be because of Corinth itself, the city. Remember, it is so wicked. And it is so hard for the Christians there to stay pure and holy and on track. And that might have been a cause for pain. Another reason, there are many new Christians joining this church, and they're coming from a very immoral, pagan background, and they're very immature. And they didn't hear Paul before say, we don't know who this Paul is. We're not going to listen to him. That might have been a cause for pain. But I think the biggest reason for the deterioration of the relationship between Paul and these Corinthians was the fact that there were false teachers invading, influxing this area. And they looked at Paul as the competition. And they denigrated Paul and tore him down every way they could. And for all those reasons, and perhaps even some more, Paul starts to hear that he is no good. And there's criticism that's coming after him. Criticism. It's never fun, is it? Nobody likes to be criticized. But boy, when it happens and it's unjust, when it's not deserved, them are fighting words. You better believe it. So, here's what Paul's facing. This is what he's been hearing. First criticism. Paul is bold in his letters, but when he speaks face to face, not so much. And for every criticism in your handout, there is that verse that implies the criticism. Paul is saying that he's hearing that his letters are weighty and forceful, but in person, he's unimpressive. And his speaking amounts to nothing. That old Paul, you give him a pen and he's fierce. Woo! But when he shows up, face to face, he folds like a house of cards. And I'm just wondering if the critics are referring back to that painful visit where Paul came back and maybe he tried to be more gentle than he should have been. Second criticism that comes up. That Paul does what he does because of selfish human motives. The scripture that kind of refers to this, I beg you when I come, I may not have to be as bold as I expect I'm going to have to be to some people who think that I'm doing things by the standard of the world. That old Paul, he's in it for the money. He's in it for the popularity and for the sense of power and being in charge. And I'm just curious if the reason those critics are leveling that charge at Paul might be because it takes one to know one. Third criticism. Paul doesn't belong to Christ in the same way that we here at Corinth do. Paul says, some of you say, I follow Paul. Some of you say, I follow Cephas. Some of you say, I follow Apollos. Some of you say, I follow Christ. Well, Paul, you ain't from around here, son. And we prefer listening to our favorite sons, to our native Corinthians. And all the while, they have started to deteriorate into a clique, following this one, and following this one, and following this one. And even those that are following Christ are making it kind of a clique instead of him being the king. Next criticism. Paul's not much to look at physically. We get this from a passage where Paul says, I'm unimpressive. Church tradition says Paul had poor sight, that he was small and stubby, that he was bow-legged, he had a great big old hook nose, that he was ugly. Still today, when people are losing an argument, they like to go below the belt. I mean, you see it in politics all the time. And if you're losing the argument, just say they're fat. I think that's what the critics have started to do here. And then there's one more criticism that's coming Paul's way. He claims authority that he does not really have. And Paul says in a passage, even though I may not be an apostle to some people, hey, surely I'm an apostle to you folk, my children. This is the criticism that Paul cannot leave unanswered. He cannot just ignore this one. Those false teachers, those people that have gotten wild in Corinth, well, Paul, he thinks he's something special, that God set him up to be an apostle or whatever. And this is religion. All roads lead to heaven. And we're just as good as Paul. So listen to us. Paul says, no way. He's not taking this laying down. So he's strapping on the boxing gloves. But right from the get-go, he says, I am not going to fight the same way those people are fighting. They're fighting the way the world is. I'm going to fight the way Christ tells me to. You know, there are preachers that every blooming sermon, they're going to tell you about the Greek, until the point that people's eyes start to gloss over. Oh. Well, today, Paul starts off with 3 Greek words, and you might want to check in that going deeper section in your handout. Look up some of those links. Because there are some words in the original language that don't readily translate themselves into our language. And these are the 3 punches that Paul comes up with. Boxing gloves on, here's the first one. It is the word that translates into meekness. And from the very first verse of this possible severe letter, Paul says, by the humility, another word for meekness, and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you. Put up your dukes. I'm ready to go to town. Meekness. That's one of those words that doesn't transfer into our language nearly as well as it was in the original one. Because it's hard for us to get by the stereotype of Barney Fife. That's not the picture of meekness. Meekness, somebody once defined, is the sweet spot between being too angry and not angry enough. Meekness is Goldilocks, just right strength, wrapped in a velvet glove, power that is controlled by the principles of Christ and by his love. Paul says, I'm coming at you with meekness. Secondly, the second punch is the word that is defined as gentleness, by the humility and the gentleness of Christ. Put up your dukes. I'm appealing for you. Here again, the word gentleness is not that pretty picture that we have of a mommy rocking her little child to sleep, singing a lullaby, gentle. There's more conveyed in the original language for this word. It's more like a mama bear coming to the aid of her child who's in distress. Paul says, I've got my boxing glove on and I'm coming at you gently. I'll be as gentle as I can, but I am not going to stand by and watch you people get hurt. You just watch my gentleness. And lo and behold, Paul's got a third punch. The third boxing glove. Punch 1, punch 2, punch 3 is the word flesh. Paul is saying, my enemies have been using the flesh of the world. You watch my flesh. It's going to be the flesh of Christ, the flesh of the Spirit. That passage up there is the translation put out by Dr. Eugene Peterson, the Message version. I liked it because it kind of made it clearer to me. Listen what he says. The world is unprincipled. It's dog eat dog out there. The world doesn't fight fair. But we don't live or fight our battles that way. We never have, we never will. The tools of our trade aren't for marketing or for manipulation, but they are for demolishing that entire massively corrupt culture. We use our powerful God tools for smashing warped philosophies, for tearing down barriers erected against the truth of God, fitting every loose thought and emotion and impulse into the structure of life shaped by Christ. Our tools are ready at hand for the clearing of the ground of every obstruction and for the building up of lives of obedience into maturity. Wow! How much better if we use those tools, if we strap on those punching gloves, as we combat what we see on social media and in politics and in our culture and in all of the ways that are leading people astray. So Paul says, put up your dukes. I'm coming at you with meekness and gentleness, and not with the flesh, but with the Spirit. So, that's exactly what you and I should do too. And there are 5 lessons that Paul brings up as to how we can be better in the conflicts that are invariably going to come. The conflicts outside of the church, and yes, even the conflicts that are in the church. Here's the first lesson. We need to accept that criticism is normal. It happens. Paul says in those 2 verses, by the humility and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you. Put up your dukes. I, Paul, who am timid when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I'm away. For some say his letters are weighty and forceful, but in person he's unimpressive and his speaking amounts to nothing. That's the criticism that Paul's been getting. Don't be shocked. Don't get in a snit and quit the church. Reason that criticism hurt Paul so much was because it was coming from people that he loved. And it was hitting him in vulnerable, soft spots. Expect it. It happens. That's what happens when you go through life. And then be ready for the next lesson, which is don't fight the way the world fights. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. When somebody comes at you with criticism, don't retaliate. Don't buy the lie that revenge is a dish best served cold, or hot, or warm, or left over, or any other way. As Christian followers of Jesus Christ, we're going to fight with the resources that the Lord gives us, not the world. And then respond to criticism, but only if it is necessary. Paul says, we, however, will not boast beyond proper limits, but will confine our boasting to the sphere of service God himself has assigned to us. And by the way, you're in that sphere of influence. Have you ever felt that sinking feeling in the pit of your tummy when you have penned the perfect email filled with scathing and hit send? Uh-oh. Maybe I should have thought that through just a little bit. Or maybe you posted something on Facebook or some other social media platform. Or maybe you were talking with somebody and you shot your mouth off just a little. Maybe you should have waited one. Just thought things through. Somebody once said, 95% of criticisms don't deserve an answer. 5% do. Paul is saying to the Corinthians, hey, you're talking in that 5% area, and that's why I'm putting up the weapons of Jesus Christ. We got to talk about this. Now, Satan, he wants you to respond to 100% of criticism. Or he wants you to keep quiet 100% of the time. Somewhere between is the better one. And if you chase off after the way Satan wants you to do it, you're going to get in trouble. Here's the fourth lesson. You be confident that the truth is going to prevail. Paul says the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Use the weapons of Jesus. Now, it's easy to see what we read in our newspapers and to see what is on our television screens and to see what's coming across our computers and to get discouraged and to think, well, the world's just gone wild. And there's just nothing we can do about it. Well, maybe you need to be reminded that Jesus says, I have overcome the world. And my truth will set you free. My weapons of the Spirit are more powerful than the weapons of Satan. Truth's going to prevail. And here's the last lesson. Need to keep our eyes on the goal. Paul says, so even if I boast somewhat freely about the authority the Lord gave us for building you up rather than tearing you down, I'm not going to be ashamed of that. I'm not going to shirk my responsibility to you. I'm not going to hide and run away at the first sign of criticism. I'm going to keep my eye on the goal. So do not let Satan sucker punch you. Draw you into a fight on his turf. Keep the high ground. Fight with meekness. Fight with gentleness. Fight with the weapons of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. Keep your eye on the goal and you're going to win. There's an old story about a frog and two ducks that were fast friends out there in the marsh. And one day the frog came to the ducks and said, you know, I've always envied you being able to fly. And I think I've come up with a way that I can experience flight right along with you. See this stick right here? I want you to pick up one end of it with your beak. I want you to pick up another one with your beak, and I'm going to clamp down in the middle with my mouth, and we're going to go flying. And lo and behold, it worked. Off they went into the air. And while they were just soaring around, a hunter down below looked up and go, well, was you lucky there? I wonder who had that idea. And the frog couldn't help himself. I did! Sometimes I wonder in conflict whether we're more interested in that we win, I did, than God wins. God wins. Poor Paul. He must have felt so discouraged. This church that he loved so much, and here he is writing this severe letter. He didn't want to do that. He just wanted to bring these people as an offering into the family of God. And Paul must have felt like he dropped the ball. Like that kid last Monday. Remember? So close, so close. No good. They sent a reporter down there in between innings. They said, hey kid, why were you so upset for dropping that ball? And he said, see that man over there? That's my grandpa. He brought me to the game. I wanted to catch that ball and give it to him. Well, this is what happened 2 innings later. Same game. He got it. And Grandpa got his ball. Because that kid didn't give up. He kept his eye on the goal. He was close but no good once. This time. He got a second chance. And our God is in the business of second chances. All you need to do is keep your eye on the prize. And you will be able to give your life and the lives of those that you bring to the King. That's what he wants. Have you given your life to Jesus? Would you give your life today as we stand?
We rose and we sang, in my life, Lord, be glorified. The way some people wield a hatchet, there's no glory in that. But for a Christian, when we fight with spiritual weapons, gentleness and meekness, love, kindness, directed by the Spirit of God, that's how we're going to overcome the world. If there's ever a way we can help you at Carter Christian Church, please let us know. If you're in our area, I'd love it if you'd check us out. You can find all about our church at our website. Well, I hope it's a good week for you this week to come. We had a great service today. God bless you. Until we meet again.